everyone, it's Annabelle. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I make up my nutrient solution and water my orchids every week or 2 weeks, depending on the season, and kind of my current nutrient regime, which does change a bit based on seasonal kind of growth habits of certain orchids. So I want to show you what I'm doing right now, kind of give you an updated nutrient mix that I'm using going into summer and the main growing season as things are kind of kicking into life, and I'm fertilising a bit more heavily maybe than I was during winter. So I just want to show you what I'm currently using and a couple of things that I'm maybe trying out in the future and just chat to you about that. So to start with, my water I use is zero water. I have two different filters of these, just a jug plus a 5 litre filter capacity. I would recommend the jug over the 5 litre one because it filters faster, and the 5 litre one you can only put like a litre in at a time anyway, so it's not like you can put loads in. I think the jug left under a dripping tap will give you a better, quicker filtering system than the 5 litre one. It also drips, so that's kind of my thoughts on that. The reason that I'm using a filtration system to remove a lot of those excess solutes from the water is because those are present in tap water in excess to what the orchid would need, which will contribute to excess salts and minerals building up around the roots. It doesn't really matter what they are. If they're in excess to what the orchid can use, they can build up around the roots and contribute to root burn. So I like to use filtered water because I can't install a reverse osmosis system in the house that we're renting. I do have one. I kind of thought maybe I could fit it onto a bath, but I can't at the moment. So I'm sticking with zero water for now, even though it's a little bit labour intensive. And I definitely, since I switched from tap water a few years ago, I've noticed a massive change in the health of my orchids overall. So I do think it makes a massive difference. In winter, I supplement the zero water with rainwater when we've got plenty, but at the moment we do not. So this is the first time this year that I've not been able to top up with rainwater at all, and I'm definitely feeling it. It's quite labour intensive filtering 20 litres of water. So as a baseline, I'll show you my tap water total dissolved solutes in parts per million, and we measure this using a TDS meter. So my TDS ppm is 253 parts per million. For my tap water at the moment. It fluctuates between 250 and 280. When I filter this, usually I get a reading of 0 with a fresh filter on the zero water filters. However, my water filters at the moment are a little bit old. They do need changing, so they're currently at around 20 parts per million. This means that the water quality will be slightly acidified. They do this to let you know it needs changing. I actually am fine with this. It means I need to pH down less at the end. So my water reading, around 26 parts per million by the time I filtered all of the water, probably sloshed a bit of tap water in by accident through the zero water filters. I tend to use them up until they get to about 50 ppm, 40, 50. For me, over that is a bit high starting with, particularly for semi-hydro when salt buildup can be a real issue. And now we're going to talk about the nutrients that I use in this solution. So this is the nutrient arsenal that I'm currently utilising for my orchids, which includes maxi crop seaweed, rain mix, Orchid Focus Ultra humic and fulvic acids, a pH down solution, and silicon supplements. I am also going to be trying out Super Thrive in the coming months, but I will do separate videos on that because I wanted to give it a thorough test because I'm not totally sure if it's superior to seaweed or not. So I'm going to briefly talk you through each of the components of this. So Rain Mix is my complete nutrient solution. So it's a powder form, so it's very economical, and it contains all of the essential major and micronutrients, and it has a really nice healthy dose of both magnesium and calcium, which I really love about it. Next up, Maxicrop Seaweed. Seaweed contains plant growth hormones which, when utilised correctly in low doses but frequently, can really be used to kind of supercharge your plant growth, in my opinion. I've really noticed a difference using it. I've been trying out humic and fulvic acids recently as they're supposed to increase nutrient uptake and make the nutrients kind of more available for the plants. Too soon to tell. Usually I use a different brand, but this one was on offer, so I'm also trying this one out. But I think it's one of those things, it's more of a long-term cultural change that you'll notice any differences for because it's not something that's going to make a difference overnight. So obviously I'll keep you updated if I notice a massive improvement, but I probably will just continue to use it and see what I think. Also my pHing equipment, so my TDS meter and my pH meter. In addition to these, I also use silicon, which is supposed to increase the plant cell wall strength, make plants more resistant to pests, and also better able to recover from stress, apparently, according to some studies. I've been using it in my nutrients for a few years and I really like it, so I just continue to use it. It's relatively inexpensive and also functions as a pH up. So I've introduced you to the nutrients that we're going to be using. So I'm just going to show you how I add them to my nutrient solution and in what quantities. So to start off with, we're going to take a starting pH value for the water that we're using. And I've pre-calibrated this before use. So what I'm going to do is I will hook the pH meter onto the side here. Okay, so hopefully you can see that set up okay. So I'm just going to get the pH meter to equilibrate quicker. Just get rid of any air bubbles in there. And then I'm just going to leave it to settle to take a pH reading of our starting water. Okay, so my starting pH is 6.79, so it's actually not as acidic as I thought it would be. Sometimes when the zero water filters start to go and they start letting through more nutrients, that they acidify it quite a lot, so I think it is worth double checking first before. So I tend to spend about a day filtering all this water. I use around 20 litres. This is just like a 20-litre bucket that I use for making up my nutrient solution in. I also use a pipette to pipette my seaweed and silicone and all the liquid additives I add and the pH. And then this is my rain mix, which I store in a little glass jar to stop moisture getting into the large one, because inevitably moisture gets in as you use this. So it's better to aliquot them and have them in like smaller jars so you're not spoiling a whole batch. This one isn't too bad, but sometimes I do get a bit of water in there and I do continue to use it. So first of all, I need to add my silicon. So silicon needs to be added into pure water because it can interact with some nutrient salts to kind of precipitate out of solution. So you can get like a kind of sludge kind of coming out of solution with silicon if you put it in after your nutrients. Doesn't always happen, but it can. So I just follow the manufacturer guidelines for this because there's not loads of information out there. So I use it 1 ml per litre because I'm using it in low TDS water, so that counts as soft water. So we're actually going to check what I'm using because I don't do this very often and actually check it. I've been using this for years though, so I'm confident with what I'm using is fine. So 1 ml per litre, we've got 20 litres, so we want 20 ml of silicone. I do have a little measure that I usually use, but my boyfriend stole it to soak his X-Wing miniatures in, so I need to do this. It's 3 ml, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 20. So, I mean, I haven't exactly counted how much water I have, but this is a 20-litre container and it fills my 5-litre pump sprayer approximately 4 times, so around 20 litres here. We're not being exactly precise, but this is what I do each time. Just going to stir that around. I do have a whisk that I use for orchid cooking. So you may have noticed my pH has gone up quite dramatically. So whenever you use silicone, you need to pH down afterwards because it does raise the pH. Plus side of that is if you pH too far one way, you can use the silicone to bring that back up. So I also use it as a pH up. So next we are going to add my rain mix. First, I keep forgetting to do this, we're going to check how much silicone I've added. So we're now at 72 ppm. So silicone seems to vary a little bit in concentration. I always just follow the manufacturer guidelines. I'm really not precise about silicone. So we've added about 50 ppm silicone in there. I just literally follow this. I'm not particularly fussy about ppm for it because it's a supplement. It's not like a key micronutrient. And again, I'm kind of just I tend to go with what my orchids are doing and add a bit more when they're growing more. So next I'm going to add my rain mix. So the concentration you're supposed to add for these is 1 scoopful per 2 litres of water. 10 scoopfuls in here, but that tends to bring it a bit high, so I tend to do that concentration when they're in active growth or for my very fast growing orchids. So I'm going to add 10 scoopfuls into here. And then mix that up again. So I've just mixed that until it's completely in solution because I could see some white kind of precipitate at the bottom. So we were at 72 ppm, so around 50 ppm of silicone. We're now at 237, 238 ppm, so that's fine. So that's only around 150 ppm rain mix. I am going to add a bit more. It tends to vary, but I like my kind of mix to be around 300 ppm by now. Going to add a tiny bit more rain mix. I tend to think of ppm as more of an internal control, because if we're using different brands of things, different growing conditions, how can we generalize the amount of nitrogen that we're feeding, for example? Just using nitrogen as a baseline example, my rain mix might have 11%, you might be feeding 20%. So 300 ppm is going to be massively different between the two. So ppm is like an internal control to check yourself really, and so that you can keep yourself consistent more than generalizing it to others. Okay, so I'm now at 291 with my rain mix and my silicone. So now I'm going to add in my seaweed extract, and I tend to kind of judge this based on what my plants are doing. So at the moment I'm going to do the 10 ml and 9 litres, so I'm going to add 20 ml-ish to this. So I've added 20 ml of seaweed to my 20 litres of water, and I'm going to mix that again. And we're now at 315 ppm, so we say around 25 ppm of seaweed I used this time. Because the active ingredients in seaweeds that we're looking at are hormones, the quality and purity of those within the seaweed can vary between different brands. So I would always kind of say maybe go with what the manufacturer says, but maybe cut it down so that you're giving it every week but in a low quantity. I find that feeding low but often is maybe better than giving a whack of hormones all at once. So now, we're not quite done yet. I've been adding this, which is humic and fulvic acids, just as a kind of extra boost for my orchids at the moment. It helps with nutrient absorption. So the recommendation for this is really high. So it recommends to add 5 ml per litre. I'm not exactly going to add 100 ml into this, so I tend to stick at around 20 ml because that's kind of the maximum that I'm happy to add in terms of value. I usually buy a different brand of this, but this was on offer on Amazon, so because Orchid Focus can be a bit expensive. There are other brands which I will pop in the description that I've also used, and I've never done a control test with these. I just kind of add them in because they are supposed to help with nutrient absorption, and I feel like my orchids respond relatively well to these, so I just continue to add them. Maybe at some point I'll do a controlled test with and without. I am planning that for a product called Super Thrive, which I managed to get in, which became more available in the UK recently, so I'm going to try that with that and do it in a bit more controlled way. But with my nutrients it's very difficult because it's like with vitamins for humans, like it's a very long-term type of experiment. You would need to do it for like a year really to be able to give results, and I just don't have that kind of patience in me for a lot of things. For things like media, yeah, I can do that, but for nutrients, I'm not going to make up 2 different nutrient solutions for like a year when there may be no difference at the end. But maybe I will try and start doing that a little bit more. Just going to mix that up. Okay, so that is all mixed up, and now I'm going to pH down my nutrient solution. I used this, it's supposed to be citric acid, not there's a phosphate based acid that you can also get, which I would probably advise against using. So with pH it tends to go quite quickly. So I tend to stir as I'm adding and just add like a little bit at a time. It won't go quickly for ages, and then you'll find it suddenly goes very quickly. If you want to see a recent video I did about how I store and calibrate my pH meters and why I feel like pH is important, I will link that up in the corner and down in the description below. I won't go into that today. So I aim for around pH 5.5 to 5.8 because I know my leca raises the pH to around 0.3. So the ideal pH range would be between 5.5 and 6.5 for nutrient absorption for orchids, and for most plants, I think. So we're nearly there, so I'm just going to add one more drop. Okay, so I'm at pH 5.48 and I am going to leave it at that. I'm not going to pH it back up. That's on the lower end of what I would usually do. I've gone a little bit over. I would try and aim between 5.5 and 5.8, but my leca brings the pH up by about 0.3 in the nutrients soaks that I've tried before with my brand of leca. So I think that this will be around 5.8 in the pot. So I'm not particularly worried about that being a little bit low. Obviously, if you're growing in organic media, that'll be naturally acidic, so you want to maybe pH a bit higher. Just double check the media that you're actually using, the intrinsic pH value that it has. So now we're going to load this up into my pump sprayer and I will show you how I water all my orchids. So to start with, in summer or in active growth, I water my Vandas, Cattleyas, Catasetums, some phals a little bit higher nutrient levels than the other orchids like Oncidiums, which have more sensitive roots. So I'm adding an extra scoopful of rain mix into the first batch that I'm going to take and water, because the Catasetums and the Vandas particularly really need a bit more nutrition at this kind of time of year when they're in very active growth, the ones that I am watering at least for the Catasetums. So I've added my scoopful in and I've just taken a bit of this nutrient solution. So everything else is going to be the same values, it's just got more rain mix in, some more nutrients like nitrogen, calcium, magnesium, that sort of thing. So my pump sprayer, I took the spray end off, so it now produces like a jet of water, so I can just go along each pot and just fill up the water reservoir for it. So I'm just going to undo my pump sprayer and put my nutrients in. So the reason that I added a teaspoon of the rain mix into this jug and then filled it up was obviously it's not going to go into solution straight away and I'm not going to be mixing this. I'm just going to pour it in and then I will just fill up with the rest of the nutrient solution. So in there we've got an extra teaspoon of rain mix in like a smaller volume. So this usually takes it to around 400 ppm usually in total with everything, and just to give the orchids that really need it extra nutrients that they require this time of year. So now just going to take a quick ppm measurement from this to show you kind of what my total is. Like I said, I don't go too much by ppm, but it's just an internal control and a reference point for you guys. You know all the products I'm using and you kind of know roughly what ppm I'm feeding them at. I'll pop it up on screen roughly. So these are my Catasetums. So the ones that are in active growth that I am watering will get this water. The ones that are in less active growth or not doing anything, I just give like the tiniest little bit to. So I just kind of trickle a little bit of water at the side of the pot. So they're not like bone dry, and I let them dry out in between when I'm doing this. It's just kind of the way I'm going. My Wine Delight started super early and it's made quite a small growth and it's matured it already. So I don't know, sorry, my Wine Delight's right at the back there. I don't know whether it's going to continue, that looks finished to me. So will it make another growth, or I don't know what it's going to do. It's not fully established in my care yet, so hoping it'll make another growth this year. So just go along the ones that get water. Sorry about the lighting here, guys. I've put a new light in and it's like super bright. So I just go along, and when I can't see the reservoir, I hold it for roughly 20 to 30 seconds, depending on how long it's been since I last watered, and I kind of know how much water that puts in. So it's not ideal, and I'm working on making some reservoir gauge indicators myself. I wasn't happy with the first time I tried, but I'm going to try again with some proper equipment. So just go along filling the reservoirs up, and that's literally it. And then every sort of 3 or 4 waterings, I just do pure water flushes, so I don't put any nutrients in. Because obviously I've modified the pump sprayer, it does drip a bit, so I just need to make sure that any water that does get on the leaves, it gets removed. And I try and always do my watering in the mornings, and I put a extra fan on in the grow room once I've done the watering in case I've dripped anywhere. This is a much more precise method than if I was to like get them all down or go along with a watering can, but still it's got its problems. I'm going to give my tenafolia a little bit of the high nutrient solution as well, and I think that's kind of it for this shelf. Then we're going to move on to the shelf below, which is my Cattleyas, and they all get the high nutrient solution. I just feel that Cattleyas are actually very fast growers and they produce quite large structures, and I do think that they need slightly higher nutrient levels than, for example, an Oncidium type, which I do feed at the kind of level that I've got down in the tub downstairs. So I give these ones the extra nutrients occasionally as well. Not all the time, it kind of depends on what needs it and how many times I can be bothered to remake up my mix, to be completely honest. But ideally I do feed them higher every now and then. And that's the thing, like I would say I'm not exacting with this because I just go by what my plants are doing, and if they're growing loads I give them more nutrients, and if they're growing less they're not going to be using so many nutrients, which means that they could accumulate in excess in the pot, so I feed them lower. So I guess that's the kind of major take home that I would say from this, because like there are guidelines available of how much you should feed orchids, but I think that it's really kind of tailoring them to your environment and what your orchids are doing in your climate at any given time that kind of makes you more successful, I guess, as a grower. I would say in my experience that's one of the major things that I've found. So yeah, I just go along. It's really easy in my transparent pots obviously because you can literally see the reservoir filling up, but then you do get algae, but maybe that's not such a bad thing in some cases, maybe in some it is. I'm not particularly bothered by the algae situation. When it dies I just repot and remove. So now we're going to move on to my Vandaceous types, which all get the higher nutrient solution, because Vandas are very fast growers and they produce very large structures very quickly, so they're going to be burning through quite a lot of nutrients. So I do feed them at a high level. Fortunately, most of my Vandaceous types are in these large self-watering pots that I got clearanced at a discount hardware store, so they have a reservoir gauge that I can kind of peek and see when they need more water, and it does last them quite a long time. So my Vanda watering has become a lot easier since I switched to this kind of self-watering type setup. So yeah, just go along with my pump sprayer, filling up the reservoirs, and that's pretty much my watering routine. It's pretty simple. So I definitely think that it's a good method. It's not the only method. You can definitely adapt it for organic media. I do have a couple in organic that I just kind of go along and I trickle a little bit in, and they're in saucers and they've got moss in, so I kind of fill the saucer a little bit, let it wick up and let them dry a little bit in between, but not too much. So this is my Dendrobium Similae crossed with Secundum. Some leaf yellowing at the moment, but it tends to lose leaves on the older growths. It's kind of semi-deciduous, so I'm not too worried about that. This is my Rhynchostylis retusa, and it's doing very well. You can see roots in the pot now. This one I did an initial switch to semi-hydro video, so you can check that video out if you want to see it then and now. It's doing quite well. I might do an update on it soon once it's maybe got a little bit bigger. It's got lots of roots in the pot now, and the retusa seems to be an extremely vigorous and fast growing Rhynchostylis, so I definitely recommend that one. Sorry about the light flare that you're getting there, guys. So that kind of sums up my nutrient mix, how I water my orchids, how I pH the mix, what order I add them in, and these are the products that I use, and it works for me, and I just kind of monitor what my orchids are doing and adjust the levels accordingly. I hope that you found this video useful and interesting, and let me know any comments down below. Thank you so much for watching today. If you did enjoy this video, don't forget to give it a like or subscribe to my channel for more regular orchid updates, and I'll see you guys all later. Bye!